You can subscribe to The Leader through your podcast provider and tell your friends about us. Please do share the news, analysis and commentary. Now, from the Evening Standard in London, this is The Leader.
Evening Standard, it's your Evening Standard.
Hi, I'm David Marsland. 35,000 HSBC jobs are at risk. Can the UK compete in the era of the US megabank?
Clearly, we've now got Brexit talks where things like fishing are being argued over. We must make sure we don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is financial services is the lifeblood of the UK economy and needs to be protected.
Our business news editor Alex Lawson on how the city must change strategy to survive. Also,
it could be, for example, you pay a fee as somebody who wants to have an associate citizenship, and there could be either a stamp on your passport or a separate document.
Is there a backdoor to the EU through associate citizenship? Sadiq Khan explains his idea to The Leader. And
the rest of the world are looking to this country to see what we do, and not just with design, but big fashion businesses and how they respond to changes in the world.
Fashion editor Karen Dacre reviews London Fashion Week. Is green the new black? Taken from the Evening Standard's editorial column, this is The Leader. For the whole thing, pick up the newspaper or head to standard.co.uk/comment. In a moment, there's a US v Europe banking clash coming, and the UK is right in the middle. There have been many things going wrong with HSBC recently: underperforming in investment banking, problems in retail, failure to break the US, even the spread of coronavirus across its largest market, Asia. The job axe has been hovering for some time, but the cut is far deeper than expected. Analysts thought 10,000 would go. It'll be 35,000 lost over the next 3 years. Some of that will likely hit London. The Evening Standard's editorial column says it's a sign of things to come, and the UK will need to fight the city's corner.
These are nervous times for the city and Canary Wharf. Today's news of heavy job cuts of well-paid investment bankers at HSBC comes hard on the heels of Friday's similar moves at RBS. RBS and HSBC cannot compete with Wall Street's Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs and the mighty JP Morgan. Only Barclays stands a chance of success, and even that is in doubt. Nothing will stop this global trend, so rather than weep about the decline of our homegrown firms, we must focus on making the city as attractive as possible to the US megabanks. That means negotiating hard with Europe for the city to remain the region's capital of finance, not trading it in for minority industries, such as fishing. It means being welcoming in our visa system to talent from around the world and being open to global investment. Europe wants a slice of that action. We must fight for it, or we shall all be the poorer.
Well, with me to explain what's happening is our business news editor Alex Lawson. And Alex, why are so many more jobs going than expected?
So it's important to look at the context of today's job cut announcements from HSBC. Britain's major banks have been pulling away from investment banking, particularly RBS, who announced job cuts the other day, and HSBC. Barclays still in there trying to fight with the Wall Street giants. But what we've seen today is that HSBC are pulling away from investment banking, so that's banking for other companies trying to raise money in the capital markets in Europe and the US, and focusing more on their operations in Asia, which are facing some short-term troubles, of course, from the coronavirus and also from Hong Kong. In terms of the numbers of the jobs, as you say, it looks pretty severe, potentially 35,000 over the next 3 years. The interim CEO, Noel Quinn, has said that some of those jobs will be lost through sort of natural attrition. They won't be sort of cut straight away. But still, it says a lot about Europe's place on the world banking stage and how quickly Asia is growing.
So what does all this mean for the makeup of skills inside the city?
Well, investment bankers did used to be seen as the masters of the universe, but their status seems to have slipped ever so slightly in recent years. And it's interesting comparing the kind of average salaries between investment banking and tech these days. It's around about the mid-70s for both industries. And particularly at the lower end, the graduate entry salaries are that much higher than they used to be in tech. So that's kind of the go-to industry in terms of it's potentially a sexier industry, and also it's now paying the salaries. So the big banks are having to work hard to attract good quality talent.
So can our local banks, as HSBC once called itself, not compete?
I think the reality is that we've had low interest rates for over a decade now, and it's difficult to make money in banking. We've seen a 33% slump in profits for HSBC today. Beyond the coronavirus, they've also got the headache of Brexit, of course, to deal with, and a wider slowdown in the world economy to do with the US and China trade war. So it's just become that much more difficult, and companies are having to slim down and focus on what they do well. And unfortunately, in the case of Britain's biggest bank, it isn't necessarily investment banking over here.
So is London in particular vulnerable to this? Is that why our leader column is talking about teaming up with Europe effectively and ensuring that London remains this area's financial capital? Yeah,
and that's why some of the banks were so vociferous in their opposition to Brexit, because we understand that we've got to work as a region to stand up in terms of our industry against America, and also working with America, ironically enough as well. The foundations of Canary Wharf was that growth in the big American banks, your Goldman's, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, really sort of pressing the accelerator over here through the 90s and making London such a huge, important financial institution on the global stage. Now, clearly, we've now got Brexit talks where things like, as we point out, fishing are being argued over. We must make sure we don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is financial services is the lifeblood of the UK economy and needs to be protected.
There's going to be a strain there, though, when you think about the treaties that are going to have to be signed with the European Union and with the US. The city's going to be right in the middle there, isn't it?
Yes, and it's going to be very awkward. And what's interesting is whether people are willing to talk about that publicly, about what they want from those negotiations anymore, because it has become a very charged subject in terms of bosses speaking out and trying to influence those trade talks.
Next.
Actually, it's a great way to unite our country because, it's an olive branch because we have left the European Union. But for those of us Remainers who want to stay close to the EU, this is one way of doing that.
Sadiq Khan talks to the leader about EU associate citizenship. Can Europe keep a backdoor open for London? I'm not sure if you know this, but Britain left the EU last month. Apparently there was a referendum and everything. I must have missed it. Anyway, we're in the transition period where all the real negotiations are taking place, and for those lamenting the loss of free movement of UK citizens through the continent, the Mayor of London thinks there may be a new route. Associate citizenship, it's called. You could get a new passport. I have no idea what colour, or a stamp in your existing one, and it would give you rights to work and live in the EU. Other mayoral candidates are not impressed. Rory Stewart says it's unworkable. Shaun Bailey thinks it's a gimmick. But Mr. Khan hopped on a train to Brussels this morning to sell the idea to the European Parliament's Brexit steering group. And our City Hall editor Ross Lydall nabbed the seat beside him to ask how it could work.
Never before has a country left the European Union, so we're in uncharted territory. It could be, for example, you pay a fee as somebody who wants to have an associate citizenship, and there could be either a stamp on your passport or a separate document, and you'd be free to travel around the European Union. You may be able to study there or work there, and so these are some of the things that we're going to discuss. Obviously, it'd be ideal if our government could negotiate this as one of the terms of the FTA that's negotiated with the European Union. And that's one of the reasons why I've written to Boris Johnson. Actually, it's a great way to unite our country because, it's an olive branch because we have left the European Union. But for those of us Remainers who want to stay close to the EU, this is one way of doing that.
Was there not a European case last year when this idea was tried but was found to be in breach of the EU rules, the EU laws?
As they currently stand, and that's one of the reasons why I'm speaking to senior members of the European Union today to try and put across to them, because it may need a treaty change, it may need a new treaty, and so if under the current rules it can't be done, there's no reason at all why the European Union, if they were amenable to this, couldn't explore this further.
Now, what, if anything, would it not give us that full membership did previously give us?
Oh, no, let's be frank. One of the things I was calling for was for us to stay in the single market and be members of the customs union. That would have meant we keep free movement both ways. EU citizens would have free movement to come to our country, including London, and we'd have free movement to go there. That's clearly now off the table because Boris Johnson has made it clear we're not going to be members of the single market. So that's not the case. All that flows from that free movement of not just people, but services, goods and capital. So it wouldn't give us any of that. But one of the things we want to explore is if the EU are interested in this and what it would entail. I mean, the exam question for the European Union is for those of them that want us to continue to not just be holiday makers there, but be students there or to work in their businesses. How can they make it easy for us to do so? One way is this associate citizenship being explored further.
EU citizens in London can vote in the mayoral elections. Isn't this just a crafty way for you to try and hoover up the votes of these EU citizens by arguing for this?
Well, I think my European credentials and my Remain credentials, don't need any more polishing. That's not why I'm doing this. It's about actually making sure that I continue to bang the drum for London. But aside from associate citizenship, there are other reasons why it's important for the Mayor of London, I would say Europe's only global city, to have close relations with the EU. We've still got staff who work in Brussels. It's really important, even though we've left the European Union, for London to have close ties with Brussels.
And you can read more on Ross Lytle's story in the Evening Standard or online at standard.co.uk. Now, put your frock away, store the high heels. London Fashion Week is over. It's so last year. Actually, it's back in September, but there's a lot to talk about between now and then. And the Evening Standard's fashion editor, Karen Dacre's here to do just that. Karen, has Fashion Week been a success this year?
Do you know, it really has. I think British fashion is in probably the best shape it's been in a really long time. I think it's dynamic and it's on a global platform now where it's kind of the rest of the world are looking to this country to see what we do, and not just with design, but kind of with our big fashion businesses and how they respond to changes in the world and kind of changes in culture, changes in the environment, all the big global conversations. Our fashion industry is reacting to those really well, I think.
One of the big changes that was called for, it opened in fact London Fashion Week with this call for environmental sustainability. Was that heeded by those who were there? Yeah,
I mean, it has been heeded for a long time, but as everybody knows, it's a very slow process in changing a big business, especially with big brands, but with the small ones as well. It takes a long time to make your business a sustainable business. But I think what we're seeing certainly on the catwalk now is lots of designers looking at the way they produce clothes to see if they can change those practices. So things like vegan leather is emerging as a big thing in fashion, which is a tricky thing in itself because it uses a lot of plastic. So designers are kind of looking to solutions for that. So how they can use, there's like bamboo leathers and all that sort of thing, natural things that they can do to make faux leather a more sustainable practice. The way that they wash denim. So we had Tommy Hilfiger here. He showed on Sunday night. And they use no water to wash their denim now, which is a massive shift. I mean, loads of denim brands do that, but for a big, massive juggernaut like Tommy Hilfiger, that's a huge thing to kind of infiltrate across your brand.
But it's not all about the serious stuff. There's fun at London Fashion Week, and there's a whole reason for it. Who did really well? Who's come out at London Fashion Week as the big star?
So I think J.W. Anderson, who's a Northern Irish designer, his name's Jonathan Anderson. He is also creative director of a fashion house called Loewe. But his show yesterday was literally sublime. He's really hit his stride where design is concerned. He's clever, he's creative, but he's also making hugely wearable clothes that I think you'll see transcend right across the industry. So you'll see that on the high street, you'll see it in the way that people are buying second-hand clothes now, which is really interesting. And it's not, it's not reinventing the wheel, it's just doing creative things really, really well. I think Christopher Kane, who's a Scottish designer, who's brilliant, He's newly independent, so he bought his business back from Kering last year, which is a big French conglomerate, and he just looks free and happy and just making really creatively interesting clothes.
So you're off to Milan tomorrow
I
because
am.
you are the coolest person who works.
Thank you.
Evening Standard.
I try.
Are you ready for it all again in September?
Yeah. I think we'll do. We go to Milan tomorrow, and then we go to Paris. So there's two
You're just
kind
showing
of.
off now, okay.
Yeah, I'm just showing off. But that's kind of where the big hitters happen. So that's where you get your Chanels and your Fendis and your Pradas. And I think what is interesting from my point of view is how well London is competing with them. So I think where you might find things are a bit more staid or a bit more, you kind of know what you're going to get in Paris and Milan. And I think in London, we just get more and more exciting.
And that's The Leader. Subscribe through your podcast provider and give us a rating too. You can also contact us through social media with the hashtag The Leader Podcast. We're back at 4 p.m. tomorrow.